We're going to begin with tonight's story, though. So I want to welcome everybody. I'm Terry Swartz-Russell, the Director of Family and Adult Education at Temple Emmanuel in Newton, Massachusetts. And I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves. And if you don't, I will mute you. And I'm going to, first of all, I want to thank a couple of people that are part of our adult learning committee at Temple Emmanuel. One is Stan Steinberg, who 3 years ago said, let's learn about Yiddish culture in America, or just Yiddish culture. And so since then, we are now on our 8th program. We have one more for the rest of the year. You'll hear about it later. And they've been fantastic, and people have been zooming in from all over, and it got us through COVID, I think. And tonight's program in particular, David Weintraub was found by Sandy Goldstein, and I don't even know if she's on here yet, but we want to thank Sandy for finding David and doing the research, because when we first started looking for information about the Jews of Miami, we didn't find that much, and then we found David in his wonderful film. So I'm going to turn the program over to Stan, who's going to introduce our speaker. Please mute yourselves, and if you have questions towards the end of the program, we will take questions and answers from David, and we'll take comments from people about, if, like we started off tonight when people came on early, talking about their family history or their memories of being in Miami. So Stan, take it away.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for coming, especially those of you who are here for the first time. I had a chance to meet David earlier this week. I, as Terry pointed out, didn't have as much to do with developing this program as Sandy did, but really thoroughly enjoyed it and have seen the film, and I know you will like it as well. So David is an award-winning film director who has produced over 40 films that have screened at film festivals all around the world and on public television, and is also the founder and director of the Center for Cultural Preservation that has completed more than 400 videotaped oral histories with elders throughout the Southern Appalachian region. He believes that understanding how people live their lives before Walmarts and plastic devices ruled our lives is important to rekindle how communities can find ways to live more resilient and authentic lives. He's also published more than a dozen books. He's a columnist with his local newspaper and dabbles in law. He's a self-proclaimed environmental troublemaker for the area and has worked with half a dozen environmental organizations to create a better balance between development and protecting our natural inheritance. And finally, he is the owner of Weintraub Films, which is a boutique film production company that produces documentaries for businesses and families. In part of the presentation, you'll see an opportunity, if you'd like, to purchase this DVD at a discounted price of $10. I know you're going to love the film. I've seen it, and I just want to say, in case you don't completely love it the way I did, you can talk to Sandy Goldstein, because she found David, and if you're not completely satisfied, she will cover the cost of your refund. So I would like to just pass this over to David and say that I think you're going to enjoy this quite a bit. There will be time for questions and answers at the end. Please put your questions into the chat. If you don't know how to do that, you can raise your hand either virtually or wave it in your screen, and we'll figure out who you are and we'll get to you as long as time allows. So David, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. And it's exciting to show this film because often your older films, everyone wants to know what you've made today, you know. And this is actually my first feature-length documentary film. I didn't mean to become a filmmaker. It kind of happened by happenstance. And part of that was trying to trace the history of my own grandparents and their travels. I happened to be born in a culturally rich family where Yiddish was the mama lashon, the mother tongue. And my grandparents were all native Yiddish speakers. And my great aunt, Dora, was a very famous Yiddish poet. She published about a dozen Yiddish books, in Yiddish, and they were translated in 23 different languages all around the world. So Yiddishkeit was in the blood, as you can say. And when I was a child, both sets of grandparents, we lived in New York, and you can tell that when I say New York. They would travel to Miami Beach during the wintertime. And I had really no idea what they did, but when they came back, as a little boy, I had the shelf in my bedroom of all these snow globes, flamingos and bathing beauties. I have one right here as a little sample. And so I had this whole collection of snow globes. But I knew that they weren't the type to lie on the beach, slap themselves with coconut butter and get a suntan. They were culture vultures. They were very connected to their culture. And so when I got to Miami Beach, me and my wife moved there for 10 years in the 90s. I tried to retrace the footsteps of my grandparents, and they were long since gone at that point. And I had a real difficult time. You said you had a hard time finding Yiddishkeit in Miami. So did I. Because when I got there and I asked the questions, people said, "Oh no, Miami was the last resort. It was Varicose Beach. It was the place that people went to die." And I had a hard time believing that. And there was a whole lot of information about the folks who went to the Fontainebleau and to Eden Rock and to the acculturated entertainment up there, but very little about Shtetl by the Sea. But I kept digging and digging and started this excavation project. And little by little, I discovered the Yiddish theaters that blossomed during the 30s to the 70s, the Yiddish radio stations, the music circles, all these things that gave this vibrancy to the Shtetl by the Sea. And in that excavation, ultimately I was going to do a traveling exhibition, but in time it actually became my first documentary film. So sit back in your comfy chair or your couch, and we're going to take a little trip in time to Miami of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
David, I think you have some comments you'd like to make. David Weintraub, can we get you on the screen?
So
there you are.
Here I am.
Hey.
Hi there. So in the height of the Yiddish cultural legacy in South Beach, there was 6 Yiddish theaters. There was 8 Yiddish radio stations. There was tons of Yiddish singing circles, literary groups, religious activity, political activity from all stripes and all spectrums, of course, in Yiddish. From morning to dusk, there was always something going on. In the early morning, you had the women putting on those rubber swimming things with a little fake flower on it and doing the sunrise swimming. In the afternoon, they had the singing circles, the cafeterias, the political activity where people would be fighting with each other, from the left and the right. But at night, they'd all get together and dance and have a good time. So it was certainly a place where culture thrived and flourished. And so when I was making this film, my thought in the back of my mind was this was going to be a reminiscence of Jewish culture, until what I found shocked me. And honestly, most people in Miami, they didn't know what was going on. They saw a bunch of old people, those days we used to call them blue-haired ladies. Today a blue-haired lady is a 14-year-old with dyed hair, but the blue-haired ladies were the older women, and they were sitting on the porches. And at some point with Miami Vice, Miami said, "Hey, we want to look like that. We want to look the glitz and glamour, and we can't have these old people sitting on porches polluting the beauty and glamour of Miami Beach." And so in just a few years, 30,000 people who were permanent residents and over 100,000 people who were visitors, the Schneevögel, the snowbirds who would come to visit, would disappeared. And so, so I was shocked to discover that, because when I got to Miami Beach, I assumed, people had just died, but they were pushed out. And what's most ironic, of course, is that so many of the people who lived in Miami Beach were Holocaust survivors. In fact, I think the second largest Holocaust survivor population in the world was in Miami Beach at that time. And so what I realized is what the story wasn't just the cultural legacy, but it was the fact that in America, we constantly gentrify things to the point where we lose what's most valuable about who we are. Because if we don't, whatever culture that I do an oral history with, and I've done over 500 oral histories over the years, people always say, if you don't know where you came from, then who are you? And if we gentrify our communities to the point where the cultural legacies disappear, any culture, then who are we as Americans? Who are we as Jews? Who are we as people? And so, so that I realized was just as much a part of the story as the cultural richness of Miami Beach. I mean, it happens everywhere, but I mean, in Miami, you have a place that was a Yiddish theater that now is a topless bar. I mean, the extremes often aren't quite so much in most communities, but they're there. And so that was an issue that I had no idea of. And so many of the people in Miami didn't, because you have such a recycled community there. So I guess one of the most important issues for me is, how do we foster this revival? And of course, my grandparents had a very rich connection to this 1,000 years of Yiddish culture, the theater and the music and the dance and the language and the literature. Do you know how many books in Yiddish were published in America from the 1880s to World War II? It was between 25 and 50,000 books of Yiddish literature. And it wasn't like you could walk into Simon & Schuster and say, here, I got this book, give me $1 million. You had to print it yourself. You would do a collection at the textile work, the sweatshop you were working in, and then you had to find someone with Yiddish type, Hebraic type. So it's just an amazing story of this richness that was here that we're quickly losing. And I certainly one of those people who thinks it's so important that we figure out ways to revive this, not just among the Alta Kaka, but to the younger people as well. So the Kinderlach. So anyway, I'd love to take your questions and comments and historical outbursts and whatever you want to say.
If you know how to use the chat, go ahead and post a question. If not, I can't see everybody on the screen, but we can, raise your hand or shout out, and we'll see if we can.
Can I shout out, Stan? This is
Yeah,
Lauren
of course.
Starr.
Hi.
I've been like bursting because I actually lived in Miami from 1978 to 2017 when I moved here. And I worked on the ambulance from 1980 to 1984, where I worked out of Mount Sinai Hospital and South Beach. So this is bringing back a lot of memories for me. And David, I can't thank you enough for doing it. I also have to tell you that I used to go on walking tours with Dr. Paul George. So I'm a huge fangirl. But I wanted to say that when I was on the ambulance, they weren't all pushed out. And a lot of the elderly, at that time, Miami Beach put a doctor on beach rescue so that they could pronounce patients rather than have to transfer them and go through hell in an emergency room. I worked for Randall Eastern, which was the first responders, the ambulance, and we would have to wait for rescue to show up so that we didn't have to transfer them. But it was really wonderful. I used to tell my father that I felt like being on the ambulance on South Beach was like having all his Myron Cohn albums come to life, that I would be on the ambulance and someone, transporting someone who we used to say they had the VD, because they always said they were weak and dizzy. And and they would say, a Yiddish Mädel, my grandson. And so it just was this rapport, but it also helped that I understood being Jewish, because a lot of times my partners on the ambulance didn't. So if we picked someone up who collapsed in shul, I knew they weren't going to have money. And that was one of our jobs as ambulance drivers and attendants, was to collect money. And I would tell the drivers, don't ask him, you're just going to look like a fool. And of course they would ignore me and look foolish. But anyway, it's just wonderful to see this captured. And when I saw this was going to come, I was just so excited. So thank you for doing such a fabulous job.
And thank you so much for sharing your memories. I appreciate that.
Those are nice comments. It's you've got your own story, which is very beautiful. Yeah. Anybody else have a comment or want to react? I thought it was interesting. It starts off being very sort of walk down memory lane, and then get to the somber part of how things change. And, you know, it's happening right around us here and now, and it continues forever. So letting it go, I think, is one of David's messages, is not a good thing. Anybody else? Thought, comment?
Well, it's Terry. My comment is that, you know, Florida, not Miami necessarily, but Florida in general is still very Jewish, you know, and people still go to retire, and a lot of young people live there as well. So there is some kind of heritage that's still going on. It's very different than what Miami was, but there is a Jewish presence, a very big Jewish presence in Florida.
Terry, while you're speaking, is it fair to ask you to comment on the next program we have?
I was going to wait, but sure. So we are partnering with the National Jewish Film Center that's at Brandeis. Last year, Sharon Revo came and spoke on Zoom to us and showed us clips of various famous Yiddish films. And this year she's going to come back, and maybe even in person, because it's not going to be till the spring. So here's hoping, guys. And we're going to be showing Mamala with Molly Pecan. And not only the original, but their film center restored the film. So she's going to show us how you restore films and things like that. So the date has not been set, but it's still in discussion. And
March, April.
Yeah, probably April, May, and people will be informed. So watch for details.
If you're on this list, you'll be on that list. So we got you. You know, David has a couple of websites. One is weintraub.net, where you can see some of his other work.
WeintraubFilms.net.
Sorry?
WeintraubFilms.net.
Yeah. And then there's the one about his, preserving culture called saveculture.org. So, and you can also just Google him. You can find out where he is. And so if you're interested in more, you certainly can have it that way. I think we're together about an hour and 15 minutes now, and seems like maybe we're done with questions. So I guess I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for being here, spending this time together. I love the film, and I hope you enjoyed it equally. And thank you very much, David, for bringing that to us. And I think Sally has her hand up. Is that Sally? Do you want to say something? No, there's a hand up there, but you know what? That's my.
There's a couple of comments. There's a couple of comments in chat that I wanted to address.
Please go ahead.
Someone had asked about Ari Foreman's Yiddish South Pacific. I'm not sure about that one, and I'm not even sure if Ari Foreman is still around. This film is 16 years old now. But there was a group in Massachusetts, I believe, that was doing the Gilbert and Sullivan Yiddish plays. Are you familiar with them? And they have some recordings. I had them come down when I was working in Miami. I had them come down several times, and they did several of the Gilbert and Sullivan plays all totally in Yiddish. But with the mannerisms and the costumes and all, whether you knew Yiddish or not, you could tell what was going on. And I think there was a program that had some translations as well. But that I know there's recordings of, and I'm thinking Northampton maybe is where they were.
Could it be the Yiddish Book Center?
Yeah, Northampton is where the Yiddish Book Center is.
It wasn't the Yiddish Book Center.
No, because that, I think I would know that.
I'll have to look that one up, and if I can find that, I'll email that to you, Terry. But
Okay.
that I know was a vibrant thing. They were traveling the country, they were traveling the world, and people just love that. And I used to do 6 showings of that throughout South Florida, and all the different. I think there was 3 different plays, Gilbert and Sullivan plays they did in Yiddish. So I'll look into that to see if there's something.
Abraham, Seidman, you had your hand up. You wanted to say something?
Yeah.
Join us.
I love the movie and I find it highly enjoyable. I saw a somewhat similar movie on the Jewish high life. This was a very somber movie. They document life in the 50s and the 60s in Miami. The main theme was Holocaust survivor trying to rebuild their life. I think it's on either Netflix or Amazon Prime, I'm not sure. Some of you may recall this movie. Done by 2 brothers who used to live in Miami at the time. Yeah, kind of documentary. I think if you like this one, you would like the other one as well. It's a different perspective, but I learned a lot from the movie, and your heart cries out because we feel that kind of as a tribe or whatever, kind of evaporating, you know, kind of what's going on here, because we kind of try to capture Yiddish, but except the Orthodox, the Hasidim, it's kind of evaporating. And if you can bring some more, as mentioned before, movies and so on to discuss it and try to keep it alive, I think it's a very rich culture that I hate to see evaporating.
Yes, you're here. Thank you.
It's actually very interesting that Yiddish is, the language is making a comeback. There are high school kids, college kids. There are programs to, through the Yiddish Book Center and other places, and colleges that have Yiddish language centers. Fiddler was on Broadway in Yiddish. Which is, that didn't exist when I was growing up. None of that.
Dr. Seuss has been translated into Yiddish.
Yeah, so I think that there's a rebirth going on, different than what was, but it's still happening. So,
and just want to mention that the DVD is still available. We're going to give your group a discounted rate of $5 off, and I'll keep that up till Monday. So I don't know if someone can put the link up there. I don't have the link handy, but
I will send the link out to everybody along with the recording of the intro and the questions. But people will be able to get that information.
Yeah, good idea, Terry, because otherwise nobody can capture it from the chat that quickly.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been fantastic.
Really great you could all be here. Thanks for the time. And David, especially to you, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.